excited that you're all here. Thanks for taking the time during your lunch hour to come out and listen to this presentation. I'm super excited to be here to talk about actually my favorite topic, which is kid defiance, and some effective ways that we as parents can help to manage these difficulties. So I love how huge a turnout there is. We're super excited there's so many people. I'm going to try to reserve like at least the last 20 minutes or so of the presentation to ask questions, but feel free as we're talking to ask questions as well, because I think that it would more fun if there's engagement between us back and forth. So the topic today is on, where is this? There it is. Strategies for managing defiance. That is obviously a super broad topic, and I'm going to give kind of broad strategies that can be effective in managing this for both kids and teens, but there's a lot to pack in a 40-minute presentation, so I'm going to go pretty fast. But again, please feel free to jump in and ask questions that you might have along the way. Just so I can get a poll and kind of a sense of the folks in the room, obviously kids span a lot of age, and the strategies that we use, some of them are actually consistent across the whole age span, some are a little different for kids versus teens. Can I just see by a raise of hands, how many of you in the room are primarily dealing with this with like young children, like elementary and younger? Okay, a lot of you. All right, great. How about more middle school? A few of you. How about high school? Okay, like one. Okay. So not to exclude you, but I may spend less time on the high school kids, just because it feels like there might be a little more of a need of the young ones. So, okay, great. So actually the 12 and under kids is kind of my jam. That's what I love to work with out at Children's. So just to kind of briefly introduce myself, I'm a clinical child psychologist. I come from Children's Hospital, employed through the University of Colorado. And my, for doors here. That shims the whole presentation. My interest and my expertise is really in working with disruptive behavior disorders and parenting, and kind of how the two can coincide and help each other out. So that's me. So I just wanted to start by kind of painting the picture of what we think we're getting into when we become parents. There's actually something called the Madison Avenue myth, which is basically that like kids are smiling and they're happy and parenting is kind of easy and you just leave the hospital and you just wing it and everything works out fine, right? How's that going? That's not really how it really works, right? This is more what it looks like in real life. This is what it feels like to be a parent. I don't know how many of you saw, like, going through the internet, but this picture, there's actually a really funny video. This girl painted her entire little kid brother in peanut butter. So that was a fun one to run into. But like, this is really what we experience when we're parents. We experience kids sticking their heads in toilets and sibling rivalry and all the fun things that come with parenting that we don't necessarily think about and feel excited about when we have a child. And so this is what we end up looking like as parents, not too long into this whole process of being a parent. We're tired, we're exhausted, and I was actually just talking to Brittany about this. You know, unlike when you have to get a driver's license to drive a car, you have to go through like classes and practice and take a test. You don't have to do that when you're a parent. You basically get to just leave the hospital, and as long as you can like put their car seat in the car, you're good to go. And everything else you just gotta wing. And that's really not fair because kids are pretty complicated. So these are some of the common behavior problems that we see when we have kids come to clinic, but these are also the most common problems that parents experience, whether they come to a clinic or not. Behavioral problems, especially in children, is the #1 reason that parents actually present to the pediatrician's office. So it's a really, really common problem, and it's something we probably don't talk enough about, how difficult it can be to raise a kid. There's so many different things that kids come with and the challenges that they come with. So toileting, picky eating, how to get my kid to go to sleep at night, how to get them to stay in their bed at night, how to get them up and ready for school on time, how to get them to do their chores, how to get them to do their homework. At a younger age, so a lot of the parents in the room have got younger kids, the most common presenting problems that we see in both kids that have got clinical behavioral problems, but also just normative kids, is tantrums. It's the #1. Non-compliance, so you tell a kid to do something and they just don't listen. In fact, I joke oftentimes when I work with parents, you would not believe how many parents I've worked with that have actually, as a first step, taken their kid to a pediatric office to get their hearing tested. Because they're like, something must be wrong with my kid's hearing because I talk to them and they just not seem to listen and they must, but no, their hearing's fine. They're just kids and they don't like to listen. So tantrums, not listening, and then aggression. Aggression is actually really, really common in kids, and it's because it works. It's functional in some way. And so those are the most common ones. Other than this list, what other kinds of stuff have you guys grappled with as parents with kids? Or does this feel pretty comprehensive?
Children imitating their older brothers and sisters, because if they're defiant, they start listening to their older siblings. And that seems to be something that I try to talk to the older one about, because the little is following her cycle.
Absolutely, yeah. Kids, the number one way kids learn is by watching. And so whether it's a good model or a bad model, that's what they tend to imitate. So I think that's a really important one. Other things? Lying, yes. Yes.
Overly emotional, like getting really upset about little things.
Yeah, and you're like, are we really on the floor screaming about the fact that your cup is green and not red? Yeah, absolutely.
I was gonna say focusing.
Yeah, they don't have very long attention spans, and yet they are expected to do things like homework sometimes that are really hard to stay focused and do, or chores, for example. Good. And then these are some of the common behavior problems in teens. I know we have less teen parents in the room, but anything we're missing on this list? Our lone high school parent. Does this feel pretty comprehensive? A lot of the behavioral problems that we see in teens or kids is not all that different than what we see in teens. There's just some slight differences. So they want to be more independent, but so do kids. But teens is actually appropriate that they get some of that independence. And so how do we balance that as a parent, giving them some of that? Relationships with peers become much more important, and then they get access to things that hopefully kids are getting less access to, like drugs and alcohol, and things like that. So to start, just to kind of give us a framework, when we think about strategies that can help manage kids' misbehaviors and their defiance, I like to just give a framework to help us really think about why kids misbehave, because I think that really helps us to think about what kind of strategies are most effective. So what I've presented here on the screen is what we call the ABCs. Has anybody ever seen this? Okay. A couple of you. Great. So the ABCs basically helps us to understand, all right, so behavior is happening in the middle, what happens before and what happens after. And both sides of that equation actually can be intervened and influence the behavior in the middle. So the A is what we call the antecedent, which is a fancy word, it just means before what happens. So in this example, a child is given a chore. So a parent might say, go clean your room. And then in a beautiful world, the child go cleans their room. That's the behavior. And then the consequence could be a lot of different things. It might be parent says, great job. It might be that they get an allowance. It might be that they get a chance to go play with their friends, whatever that consequence might be. Now, the way that a parent sets up the expectation around how to do the chore and the way that we respond after the kid has done the chore are both going to influence the way that behavior occurs and whether the kid actually does the chore or doesn't do the chore. So let's just walk through an example. Let's think about what's a common behavioral problem you guys experience with your kids. Cleaning the room. All right, so we tell our kid, go clean the room. So let's think about what happens right before. As you're giving the command, what might be some of the things that are happening?
They're playing video games.
Yeah, that's a great, yes. So that is a context thing that makes it very difficult, right? So kid is playing video games, and you as a parent do what? Could be a lot of things. You might raise your voice and say, go clean your room, okay? So you might give some additional instructions, turn off the TV, different things like that. All right, what is our kids doing? How do they respond to that command? And it could look a lot of different ways. But what are some examples of how your kid might respond? Nothing, yeah. We got that selective hearing, so they just keep playing their video game. What else might they do? Blow up, did I hear that? Yeah, so they get upset. What else? Ignore you. Yeah, they just ignore you. And beautiful day, they might actually listen, but that's probably a rarity, right? All right, and so then let's say they don't listen, they just completely ignore you altogether. What might you do after that as a parent?
Turn off the TV.
You might turn off the TV, yeah. What else might you do?
Smash their Xbox.
Yeah, you might take a breath because you're feeling pretty frustrated in that moment.
Seek confirmation that they heard you.
Yeah, did you hear me? You might escalate your own behavior a little bit, like yelling, maybe getting in front of them, in front of the TV. And a lot of times that leads to some fighting between you and your kid of like, get out of the way, or I just need to finish this level, or whatever it is that they might do. And then there's a lot of negotiating, and kids are master negotiators, aren't they? So the way that we responded, whether it's we just immediately shut off the TV and didn't engage and said, go do this, or we escalated ourselves, or we took a break. I mean, each one of those different ways that we respond as a parent is going to influence the way our kid is going to respond to you the next time you ask them to clean their room. Because kids learn, okay, I do X and Y thing always seems to happen. And they start to figure out their environment. And the tricky thing about that is we aren't always, as parents, purposeful in the way that we are doing the why. And so the whole point of this presentation is have us to start really think purposefully about how do we respond to our kids when they do this, when they just blatantly ignore us, or they throw a fit, and they just don't listen. And how do we more purposefully respond to them in a way that's going to make their behavior more likely to be what you want it to be the next time? So the other kind of framework thing I wanted to set up real fast is just this idea of consequences and make sure we have some common language as we're talking. So there are actually 4 different types of consequences, 4 different categories that they fall into. These get really confusing. If you've ever taken like a Psych 101 class and you've heard these terms before, the ones that get the most confusing are negative reinforcement and positive punishment. Those things don't seem like they should go together, especially negative reinforcement. That one just feels like a tricky one to wrap your brain around. Think about positive and negative as math. That's all it is. We're not talking like emotional valence of these words, we're just talking math. So positive just means add, negative just means subtract. So when we add something, it's a positive punishment or reinforcer, and negative means we're removing something, and that makes it the negative, and it could be a reinforcer or a punisher. So just kind of want to walk through this real fast. So positive reinforcement means we add something, it's got that positive. Reinforcer means more likely to occur the next time. So we've added something to an environment that makes a kid more likely to listen to us in the future. What might be an example of this?
Candy.
Yeah, candy, absolutely. How many of you have ever been at Walmart and just given your kid the candy bar in the candy aisle because they're throwing a fit? Yeah, we've all done that, right? Yeah, so candy is a great one. So the reason it's a positive reinforcer is because we've added something to the environment, the kid finds it valuable, and so whatever it is they just did right before they got that candy, they're more likely to do it again in the future. Now negative reinforcement's the more complicated one, the one that gets a little more confusing, but negative means what?
Take away.
Take away, good. And reinforcer means what? The behavior more or less likely to occur? More. So what's an example of something? I'll give you guys one example and then you can give me another example, but an example of taking something away that makes a behavior more likely to occur. I'll give you an example from my personal life. I hate mornings. They're my least favorite time of day. And so when my alarm goes off, I want to throw my phone across the room. And that alarm beeping is an aversive stimulus. I hate that thing. So I have managed to train myself in about 0.2 seconds to snooze my alarm. And I have figured out over the course of time what my cell phone needs, like what button to push, the quickest way to turn that thing off. That's very negatively reinforcing to me. I stop an aversive stimulus by doing something with my cell phone. Another classic one from the automobile industry is our seatbelts. How many of you have cars that beep at you if you don't put your seatbelt on? Yeah, I remember when I got my first car, those things didn't exist. And then when I got my new car, I was like, this is the worst, and I wear my seatbelt much better than I used to because very negatively reinforcing. I put my seatbelt on, that beeping stops. Negative reinforcement is actually the most common type of consequence that maintains kids' misbehaviors. Who can think of a potential example of a time that we may negatively reinforce our kids for misbehavior? Accidentally, but it happens all the time. Anybody think of an example?
When you give in to whining or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great example. So we tell our kid, go clean your room. Mom, I don't want to. I need to finish my video game, blah, blah, blah. And they're whining and you're like, okay, fine. Because maybe you've also had a busy day and you need to go make dinner and you got a lot going on. And so they're whining, you just like, you relent, right? Happens to all of us. We all do that at different times because life is busy. That is a negatively reinforcing example. For both of us, actually, right? Because as a parent, what stopped? The whining. So that's actually really reinforcing to just leave because now we don't have to deal with it. On the kids' side, what aversive thing went away? Yeah, you nagging them went away. So they're more likely to whine and you're more likely to walk away next time. So you're actually both negatively reinforced in that example. It's a great example, thank you. All right, on the flip side, negative punishment. So negative means what? Take away. Punishment means what? Behavior more or less likely to occur. Less. So what might be an example of taking something away to make a behavior less likely to occur? Something we do as parents probably all the time as a consequence. Yeah, you took their video games away. That's a really good example. So you took something valuable away from them, and the hope would be is that makes it less likely to occur the next time. Positive punishment. So positive means we add. Punishment means the behavior goes down. Good. So positive punishment. What might be an example of kids in parenting with this? When might you add something?
More chores.
Yes, more chores. That's a great example. So you have to do an extra chore and in response to the fact that you didn't listen to me. Good. Questions about these? So the best way to change behaviors through reinforcement, specifically positive reinforcement. And the trick with all these consequences, and you're going to hear this theme throughout, is that consistency is critical. Our kids play us like slot machines. And if we aren't kind of the mindset that the house always wins, our kids will keep playing the slot machine. And the slot machines are very, very addictive, right? We all have done it. We've all played, I just got to put one more quarter and maybe I'll win, right? Our kids do the same thing with us. All right, so let's switch into some strategies. So the first one is actually going to be the most effective because it is free. It's something you can do all the time, and it's something that we actually are already doing all the time. We're just going to start doing it a little bit more purposefully. So in all the research that's been done on parenting, they have found that your attention is by far and away the most effective thing that you have available to you as a reinforcer. More so than candy, more so than video games, believe it or not, more so than being able to play with their friends. A parent's attention is the most powerful thing that you have at your possession. The trick is that we are oftentimes reactive, we all are, because we're busy and our kids can get on our nerves. And so most of our attention in response to bad behavior actually inadvertently reinforces that behavior. So we're going to talk about some ways to flip that and be a little bit more purposeful in the way that we use our attention. The trick with attention is that kids actually don't care a whole lot if they get negative or positive attention. So if I am yelling at you versus I'm giving you praise, in both respects, I'm getting you to engage with me. And if the alternative is I get nothing, I'll actually take yelling or nagging over nothing. And so we inadvertently can reinforce our kids for their misbehaviors if we're not giving them a lot of positive attention, but they know how to get us riled up and get our negative attention. I'll give you guys a classic example of how this works. How many of you have ever been, this happens a lot, especially for parents nowadays that telecommute or that work from home sometimes, but even if you're on the phone with a family friend or something like that, how many of you have not had your kids around you? They're busy doing stuff, but the second you get on the phone, all of a sudden they need you right now. Mom, Dad, I need your help with something. How many of you have had that happen? Yeah. That is a great example of how attention is so powerful, because what do we usually do when we're on the phone and they're bugging us? Go away, stop, not right now, I'm on the phone, right? Do they stop? No, not usually, because they are getting that attention from you. Even though it's not exactly the attention they might want, they're getting something from you. So we have to be more thoughtful and more strategic. So there is a strategy called active ignoring and strategic attention or positive praise. They all kind of go hand in hand. It's kind of two sides of the same coin. So I'm going to talk about both of them. You have to do them both together. If we're really, really good at praising, but we're not so good at the ignoring, or vice versa, this strategy doesn't work. But essentially what we're teaching our kids is when you do X thing, you're going to get attention. When you do X thing, you're going to get no attention. But unfortunately, inadvertently, we oftentimes do the opposite of that. So The praising piece. The number one thing I want to talk about is just like how to praise and what kinds of things to praise. So praise, the more specific you can be, the better. Parents are really good at giving kind of general praise. So things like great job, way to go, nice work. But what that doesn't do is teach us what exactly it is that I just got attention for. The more specific we can be, the better off our kids learn. So a more specific example of praise might be something like, thanks for listening to me the first time I asked you. That's a very specific behavior that I've now praised. Who can think of other examples?
High fives?
Yeah, high five is a great physical praise. Yeah. What other examples? Specific.
Thanks for not having an accident.
Perfect. I really like you gave that as an example because that leads me to my third point on that list, which is the positively stated. We're really good at praising our kids for what they don't do. So thanks for not hitting your brother. Thanks for not screaming. Kids are impulsive. As we talked about, their attention spans are very short, and so is their impulse control. So when we say thanks for not hitting your brother, what do you think happens? They actually don't hit their brother, because they heard those words and oh. So what's the flip side? How do we praise that, but in a positively stated way? Instead of saying thanks for not hitting your brother, what did they do?
Good job keeping your hands to yourself.
Good, yeah, thanks for keeping your hands to yourself. That's positively stated. So we want it to be what they are doing, not what they're not doing. The last thing is we want it to be immediate. When we praise our kids, but we praise them 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes later, it loses its salience. We want to catch them in the moment and catch them being good as often as we can. What oftentimes happens as parents is we call it let sleeping dogs lie. So a lot of times kids are being good and we almost don't want to say anything because we're afraid if we say anything, things will erupt. And so we oftentimes miss out on a lot of opportunities to catch them in the moment being good, but those are the moments we want to praise them. The reason that kids tend to start getting all rambunctious after we praise them is because they might not be getting it as much as we would maybe be benefited from giving them. And so they resort back to the way they know how to get our attention, which is usually kind of being rambunctious. The 5-to-1 ratio on here is actually really interesting. For those of you that are in any kind of romantic relationship, this is also interesting from just a romantic partner perspective. They've done research to show what's kind of the optimal ratio of positive to negative interactions you need to have with your kid. It's also true of your relationship with your partners, of what's kind of the optimal relationship ratio. To have a kid be kind of optimally behaved, the ratio is 5 positives for every 1 negative. So negative doesn't just mean like you're yelling at them or punishing them. It actually can mean you're just kind of nagging them or reprimanding them or telling them to do things, which we have to do as parents all the time. So it's not that those are bad things, but we have to offset that with all the praise that we do. So 5-to-1. I call it the bank account analogy just because we can think about it like a bank account as a relationship bank account. So the more deposits you're putting in, the better off you're going to be. Because when you take out a withdrawal, it is always weighted more. So it's like 20-cent deposits for every $1 withdrawal. So you have to put in a lot more deposits to make it work. The flip side of praise is active ignoring. So active ignoring means not paying attention to the obnoxious behaviors that our kids engage in on a regular basis that we usually get hooked by. So what might be some examples of obnoxious, maybe not behaviors that are rule breaking, so not like aggression, but just obnoxious behaviors? Interrupting, yeah, that's a great one. What else?
Temper tantrum.
Yep, temper tantrum's another great example.
Touching each other, like in the backseat.
Yes, yes, oh man, in the car rides, isn't it the best? Johnny touched me. Yeah, so all the kind of siblings spatting, maybe it hasn't gotten to the point where a parent really needs to get involved, there's just kind of little sibling arguments. Whining is another example, incessant questions. So when you get to play 20 questions with your kid, or if you tell them to do something and they get into that negotiating stuff, so I need you to turn off the video games and go put your shoes on, but what about blah, 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 can I just have 5 more minutes, all those kinds of statements. Those would be examples of things that we could just blatantly not attend to. We don't ignore compliance or non-compliance. So that's a big one that parents will sometimes inadvertently apply this strategy to. So if you say, go clean your room and they don't listen, that's not a time we would ignore. We're gonna follow through the consequence in that example. Extinction bursts are really, really important to be aware of as a parent. So extinction bursts are when I'm used to doing a certain thing and all of a sudden I don't get the response that I'm used to, I'm really committed to that behavior has worked for me, so I'm gonna actually dig in my heels and make it even worse. You've probably all experienced this with your kids. Probably when you're trying to like lay down the law with bedtime, and we're going to bed at 8 o'clock, or a kid is throwing a tantrum and you're trying to wait them out until they stop crying. Usually what happens is those behaviors get worse before they get better. Has anybody ever experienced that? Yeah. So tantrums, I think, is a really common one that we experience it, but we actually experience it all the time as adults too. So think about, I put the vending machine example here as an example, but the vending machine analogy is, how many of you have ever gone to the vending machine, you put in your quarters or your dollars to get your food and a little coil thing turns, but then that bag of chips is just mocking you as it dangles. Have you ever had that happen? What do? Yeah, we don't just walk away, right? We're not gonna just give up on that bag of chips. We might kick it. What else might we do? We might shake it, push the buttons again. There's a reason they put stickers on the vending machines to say, like, don't rock the vending machine, because we've all done that, where we're very committed to getting our candy or our bag of chips. Kids are the same way. They kind of treat us like vending machines. So if they're used to getting a certain thing from you, so maybe like negotiating has worked really well for them in the past, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm not negotiating with you anymore, they're actually going to negotiate with you more when you first try to ignore them. It's really, really important when you start trying to do something like active ignoring to make a decision. I'm ignoring this behavior until the end of time in that moment, because if you give in as a kid is escalating, what do you think happens the next time? It's going to be worse the next time. So we actually create more of a monster. And that actually happens to all of us all the time. We've all given in to our kids with different behaviors, and they learn over time to kind of escalate to a new level. So the reason it's called active ignoring is because we're not going to just walk away and be gone until our kid is done. We're actually going to want to kind of stick around in the environment, because the second that behavior stops, we're flipping the coin and we're using the active praise. We want to actively catch them being good the second that misbehavior stops, because then what we're doing is we're creating a real nice contrast of, I don't pay attention to this behavior, but I do pay attention to this behavior. And kids learn over time, okay, this is what I have to do to get parents' attention. Questions about that? Okay.
Wait,
Yeah, please.
you use the example of the turn off videos in your shoes, I think, as the annoying behavior, not the compliance.
So the annoying behavior in that circumstance might be the negotiating. So the tricky thing in a lot of these situations is you're actually using like multiple different strategies simultaneously. So we're going to talk in a second about the compliance strategies. The active ignoring strategy you'd be using that in a big situation might be around the negotiating. So, or the whining. So a kid says, Mom, like, I can't believe you just turned my video game off. Like, you're so mean, I hate you. All those kinds of things that parents are like easily hooked to be like, don't talk like that to me, or, things like that. We're gonna ignore those. We're gonna watch any like movement off the couch to go clean the room, and we're praising that. Those are the pieces that we use in that example. And then we'll talk in a second about the command consequence stuff. Great question. Any other questions about strategic attention? Okay, very, very briefly, there's one other thing that I like to talk about when it comes to more positively based strategies, and that's just this idea of quality time. In this day and age, quality time is really pretty precious, because we rarely have it where our phones aren't on us, or we're not checking our email, or the TV's not on, or we're not busy taking our kids to soccer games and baseball practice and after-school clubs. Life is really busy in the United States at this point. And so we don't tend to spend as much quality time with our kids as we could. And so one of the strategies that we frequently recommend is just spend 10 to 15 minutes a day with your kid. If you think back to that bank account analogy, instead of it being like 20-cent deposits all day, spending 10 to 15 minutes of quality time with your kid is like putting in a $500 deposit. You've now put in a tremendous amount of positive so that you have that buffer to kind of have to get after them a bunch and not impact the relationship as much. There's very specific kind of quality time games that you can play with your kid. The most common kind of component of it that I'll just highlight is that the kid gets to pick what you're doing. And this is not educational. As parents, especially parents of young kids, we tend to make play educational. So we want them to tell us what color things are, or what shape things are, and different things like that. During this 10 to 15 minutes, we don't do any of that. We're just playing. We're just following their lead and letting the kid really drive the bus of what we're doing. With teens, it looks a little different. Usually you're just kind of spending quality time with them and hanging out with them, talking about their day, trying to not nag them or pick what you guys talk about, but just kind of spend some time with them, putting your cell phone away. And then another just very concrete strategy that we have found to be super, super important for impacting the quality of the relationship is just eating dinner together. Eating dinner together as a family has actually been shown to be one of the most protective factors against kids developing mental health concerns as they get older. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but we won't get into those today, but just know that prioritizing eating a meal together as a family is a really a helpful strategy. And I won't highlight this a whole lot just in the sense of time, but one of the positively based consequences, so a positive reinforcement strategy that can be really helpful is a point or token economy system. Basically, this is just using some sort of exchange system. It can be marbles, it can be poker chips, it can be Monopoly money, it can be actual points on a sheet, but the idea is that they get points or tokens whenever they engage in good behavior, and then they can exchange those out over time. And that's been shown to be really effective. I won't get into this a whole lot just because a lot of parents already use this strategy, and so people tend to be more familiar with it. And I'm happy to send these slides to you and you can distribute them out, so you don't have to write them down. Okay, so let's talk about the only antecedent strategy, so antecedent again meaning before misbehavior occurs, that I'm going to talk about is how to give effective commands to help manage when your kids are being defiant or not listening. Effective commands is a really important strategy on the antecedent side to help manage the chances that our kids are actually going to behave. And so I just want to kind of highlight a couple of these. The number one thing that parents get stuck in is they say that they'll tell their kid to do something when they don't actually have the bandwidth or resources to follow through if their kid doesn't. This happens probably most commonly in the morning. How many of you find that behavior problems before work and before school are one of the more difficult times of the day? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nodding. Why do you think that is? Anybody know?
They don't have a choice, there's a timeline, deadlines.
Right, so if you tell your kid to do something and they don't do it, you got to get out the door. So if they don't do it, you're not going to really follow through necessarily in that moment, right? And that's true of like any of those high pressure times a day. You'll notice that kids tend to misbehave more in those moments, and that's because we might not be able to consistently follow through, and our kids learn that over time. So again, thinking about they play you like slot machines, this is a time when they know the slot machines are looser, and they're more likely to get a bigger payout because we're busy, right? So the number one thing to do on the antecedent side is pick your battles. Think to yourself, okay, if I'm going to say this, will I follow through? Am I willing to be late for work? Am I willing to bring my kid to school in their pajamas? Are those things that are actually things I'm willing to do? And if not, don't give the command, because you make things harder for yourself when we give commands and don't follow through. So first thing is just being strategic in picking your battles. Other things to be thoughtful about is to be specific. So when we give commands, we frequently say things like, stop doing that, or, go get ready for school. What does that mean? To a kid, it can usually mean very different things than what we have in our head. So our kid comes back and they've got mismatched socks on and they haven't brushed their hair or their teeth, but they put a shirt and jeans on and they think they're ready for school. So we have to be really specific in what we actually ask them to do. And similar to the way we praise, we want to be really positively stated. So we don't want to say things like, don't do this, we want to say do this, and tell them what we actually want them to do. So rather than saying stop hitting your brother, keep your hands to yourself. Be succinct. We as parents tend to be really wordy, so we'll give long, drawn-out explanations about why we want our kids to do things. And a lot of that is we're trying to preemptively avoid the negotiating that's about to happen, but it doesn't work. Usually the command gets lost in all those words, and so we want to be really succinct. We want to emphasize what we're actually telling them to do versus kind of giving a long, drawn-out explanation in the middle. Another thing we want to be thoughtful about is to not ask things as questions. So as adults, we do this all the time. If you printed something off the printer and you said, hey, Larry, can you stop at the printer and grab that paper for me? Larry knows to just grab the paper for you, and you know that you're going to ask, that it's appropriate and polite to ask. Versus with a kid, if you say, can you go put your shoes on, what might they do? That feel good. Or they'll say no, because they don't want to. Versus if you say, go put your shoes on, there's less room for negotiating. So we want to actually phrase things not as questions. You'd actually be surprised how much more compliance you'll get just by that one strategy. I'm not asking it as a question. You'll get less negotiating because it's actually framed as a direct thing. Don't count. Parents tend to count. There's actually a lot of pop culture parenting stuff out there that talks about counting. So like 1, 2, 3 Magic, it's like a very popular parenting book. Anybody have any idea why counting might not work in our favor?
They know they can delay for the entire count.
Yeah, so I was one of these kids that we're talking about, one of the really stubborn, strong-willed children, and my mom, I can't tell you how many fractions she got between. You know, it'd be like 2, 2.5, 2 3/4. I better not get to 3, and because you should, as a parent, you don't want to have to punish. It's not fun. So I knew, and I don't remember now, but there was like a certain fraction that I knew. At that point, I actually had to listen, and I would just ignore up until that point. And her counting would get very slow and very drawn out. So that's the risk. If you were like 100% on it and you were always counting 1, 2, 3 consistently and there was no delay, you could count. But the point is that our kids learn, there's some sort of signal in the environment that actually tells them when they actually have to listen, and it's usually not the counting. It's usually we raise our voice or we get closer to them or there's some other kind of signal. Another thing that parents tend to do that we want to try to avoid is giving more than 2 chances. So again, punishing is not fun. Having to follow through this stuff is not fun. So we tend to say, well, I'll just ask them one more time. Can you just go get your shoes on, please? And we do it again and again and again. And our kids learn, if I just kind of slow things down and I don't really listen, I might get mom or dad to say, go put your shoes on 10 times before I actually have to listen. There's been research that's shown that after the second chance, the percentage of time kids actually listen unless you escalate your behavior in some way drops basically to 0. So you're just wasting your time. So do it 2 in consequence and never more than that. And then the other thing we sometimes fail to do as parents is we don't actually praise them when they listen. So every time a kid listens, we want to give them praise. And a lot of times parents will have a reaction of like, I shouldn't have to praise them. This is stuff that they should just do. But the reality is that they don't. And so we want to praise them to get them to do that behavioral kind of thing that we are asking them to do. And then we have to be consistent when they don't listen after that second chance. So kind of the way this looks is, Johnny, go put your shoes on. And then you just quiet, and you don't say anything, as tempting as it might be. 5 to 10 seconds, let them see if they'll listen. If they start to move towards complying, praise. After that 5 to 10 seconds, if they haven't, Johnny, go put your shoes on, or whatever the consequence will be. Wait again for 5 to 10 seconds, and they still haven't listened, that's when the consequence should happen. Now what happens sometimes is parents will decide, okay, they didn't listen, we're gonna implement a consequence. All right, Johnny, you didn't listen, you're getting your video games taken away for the day. No, I'm gonna do it right now. How many people have kids do that? And then they listen. And we usually are like, oh thank God, now I have to follow through the consequence, and now I have to deal with them not having video games all day. But what did a kid just learn? Yeah, I can wait till that point now until actually I have to listen before mom or dad will actually follow through. So once you've made the decision the consequence has to happen, you want to always consistently follow through. Even if they start to try to negotiate and follow through at that point, it's too late. Questions about effective commands? Okay. All right, household rules. The basic things I'll talk about with this, just in the sake of time, is you don't ever want more than 3 to 5 household rules at any given time. And when a kid breaks a household rule, immediate consequence. You don't get 2 chances in that kind of an example. Can anybody think of an example of what a household rule might be that's different than compliance? What was that?
Throwing a ball in the house.
Yeah, throwing a ball in the house. A lot of times it's safety stuff or property destruction kind of things. So those are the kinds of things you want to have with household rules. And like I said, immediate consequence after it's violated. So I'm going to break down consequences into 2 strategies. For younger kids, which is going to apply for most of you, actually the number 1 most effective consequence is timeout. Up until about age 8, timeout is by far and away the most effective consequence. But the devil is in the detail here, because timeout can look 100 different ways for 100 different parents. And there's a couple of really critical things that timeout needs to have in order for it to be effective. One is the time limit. So it needs to be about a minute per year of age. So a 5-year-old's going to do a 5-minute timeout, a 7-year-old's going to do a 7-minute timeout. But the other critical piece regarding the time of timeout is that kids should not be let out of timeout until they've calmed down. Timeout's actually been shown to be a twofold benefit consequence. It's both a punisher, but it's also an emotion regulation moment for the kids. They actually get to learn to calm themselves down and regulate, which is a really important component of timeout. Putting the timeout in a boring part of the house. So if you put your kid in timeout on the stairs and they can watch TV from the stairs, that's not an effective place for them to be. Or if their siblings are running around and they can still talk to them, it's not effective. They really need to be removed from everything that's positive. And the most important thing that we tend to fail to remove is our attention. So we tend to keep talking to our kids when they're in timeout. Sometimes it's reminding them, if you would just sit down and be quiet or calm down, you could get out of timeout, or different things like that. That's attention. And again, remember, negative attention in the absence of no attention is very reinforcing. So we have to be sure that we're not talking to them or interacting with them in any way during their timeout. And then the other thing that you have to be thoughtful about is that they always have to go back to doing what it is you told them to do. So if you put them in timeout because they didn't listen, after the timeout they have to go back to do whatever it is you told them to do to begin with, because otherwise they learn, well, I have to do my time in the chair, but then I don't actually have to clean my room. So it actually is worth it. The most straightforward way to deal with getting off the chair is just to put them back. So we just call it the put back method. You just scoop them up underneath their arms and stick them back on the chair. And sometimes you have to do that repeatedly. I can tell you times I've worked with kids where I've gotten like an arm workout and I can totally skip weights for the day at the gym because I've done this for 30 minutes. But you do it consistently and kids learn very quickly, pushing this isn't gonna work. And my mom or dad is just gonna make me sit in this chair, so I'm gonna stop pushing it. And then consistency is the most critical thing. The other thing that we tend to fail to do is that we don't consistently use the strategy, and so kids don't actually have to follow through because we don't follow through. So consistency is critical. For kids older than 8, there's 2 strategies that actually been shown to be the most effective. We've actually talked about both of them already in here today. One is privilege loss, so you just take whatever privileges away. The kind of pitfall to this strategy is that we oftentimes either take privileges away much too long. So I can't tell you how many times I got grounded for the rest of my life as a kid. All the time. And you get to a point where as a kid you're like, yeah, sure, whatever, because you just know like you're not actually gonna follow through with that. So you have to actually give a consequence that you're willing to follow through and that your kid knows that you're gonna follow through with, but you're also taking stuff away that they care about. So with young children, if you take a certain toy away, they usually don't care because they've got very short attention spans and they go find other toys. So you have to, and that's why timeout tends to work much better for young kids. With teens and kind of middle schoolers, the phones, man, those things are like the most lifeline kind of privilege that you can use. Video games is another big one. But the privilege has to be salient. The kid actually has to care that it's gone. The loss needs to be immediate and it should be time limited. So don't take it away for a month, because it's too long. Usually privilege loss shouldn't be for more than a day, unless there's some egregious thing that your child has done where it warrants a longer time. Usually anything more than a day, the kid just gravitates to other things and the loss actually becomes less important. And then job card grounding is another really effective strategy, and so we mentioned that already, but giving a chore in response to a misbehavior is actually really effective. The trick to this is the chore pauses their access to everything else. So when I give my kid, you have to go clean, the guest bathroom, for example, they don't get to go play and do anything else until that guest bathroom is clean. Usually job cards work best if you write like 10 to 15 of them on like index cards, and you as the parent pick which one they have to do, because kids very quickly will hierarchy like which chore is like the least aversive. So strategy or chores that I think kids tend to hate the worst are like when they have to do a siblings chore, that's like the worst. So having to like clean their brother's bathroom, like you might as well just let them just die right there. So you want to make sure the chores are developmentally appropriate. They take about 15 minutes to complete, and like I said, all rewards are paused and all privileges are paused until that chore is done. The other trick with this is that if a kid refuses, he's like, I don't care, I'm not going to do it. Call their bluff. And make sure that they're not doing one of 2 things. Bootlegging is one of the biggest problems with job cards. Bootlegging just means that you've gone off and you start doing other things, and they've gone and accessed something that they're not supposed to. So either you're like, where's Johnny? And you find him in his room and he's playing with his Legos. Well, the job card's not going to work because it didn't actually restrict their access to anything. The other thing we have to be sure we're doing during job cards is that we're not paying attention to them. So you've given them the choice. They can go clean the guest bathroom, and as soon as that's done, they get access to their privileges again. But we as parents tend to want to remind them, if you would just do your chore, you could get your privileges back. And so we'll talk to them and keep reminding them and kind of nagging them and talking to them, just go get that chore done. Just go get that chore done. And that's attention. And again, in the absence of all other things, negative attention is very reinforcing. So I think with that, these are some resources. If your child or a family friend's child or somebody you know is having a really difficult time where their behaviors have gotten beyond what you feel like you can manage as a parent, we are here as a resource. We have an outpatient clinic, and that's the number you can call to schedule an appointment. These are some books. I've read all of them. They're all really great. They're written for parents, and they've got a lot of really helpful strategies and a lot more depth than we're able to go in today. And then, believe it or not, the CDC actually has a really great website for parenting and behavior management. They've actually got a lot of great handouts and videos that they've created that are actually really well done. So that website is the website, but if you just Google CDC and parenting, that'll be the first thing that pops up. And with that, obviously rules, I think are really tight, but you got 10 minutes, so whatever questions you have, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah?
What's the best way to deal with a toddler temper tantrum once it gets to like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, they're still crying?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the answer is not an easy one as a parent, because it's really hard emotionally to cope with your kid crying for that long. But the most effective thing is to wait them out. I've worked with some kids that have tantrumed for as much as like 2 hours on the extreme. But if you can wait them out and you are there the second they downshift at all to praise them, over time that will get much shorter. The trick is, in those kind of really, the kids that tend to have really extended tantrums, you just have to wait close by until you see any kind of downshift. So it might not be that they're completely calm, but they might go from, I'm screaming at a decibel level of 100 and now I'm at a 50. And you're saying, oh, I can see that you're really trying to calm down, great job, and you're trying to provide some of that praise. And if they ramp it back up, then you remove it again. But you're just trying to kind of create that message of, I'm seeing you try to calm down, great job. Yeah?
What about the behaviors that just cannot happen because of the danger or physical harm? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so punishment is most effective when it's immediate and what we call severe. So you want the punishment to match the crime. So for example, if it's a safety issue and my kids just ran out in the street, I'm probably going to reprimand them much more severely than I would if they just told me no. So you have to kind of amp the punishment up in some way. So what that looks like depends on the age of the kid. And so if it's more like a 12-year-old, the job card might just be much longer than 15 minutes, versus if it's a 2-year-old, I might do something more like, just yell at them in the moment very sternly, and then take them to a timeout. Yeah?
Do you have any specific strategies for bedtime? I'm sure all of this kind of comes into play, but I'm just curious about it.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges with bedtime is, in the back of our mind as parents, we're like, if they don't get enough sleep, they're gonna be a bear tomorrow. And so we tend to not be quite as stern or as consistent as we should be at bedtime, just because there's so many competing agendas, or we're tired because it's the end of the day and we have 4 other kids to put to bed, and there's a lot of different kind of competing things. So the best idea is to try to practice doing a bedtime routine and being very consistent, whatever the consequence is going to be, on a night when we're not met with as many pressures. So school year is almost out. Summer is a great time to work on bedtime, just because we've got less pressures of like what's going to happen the next day for them to get to school. But some of the most important things is to establish a regular bedtime routine. So I always do A, B, C, D, and then bed. And the kid kind of learns over time. These kind of things are all mentally preparing them that this is the final thing that's going to happen. Other things that can be really helpful, if at the end of that bedtime routine, they know I get to look forward to like 10 minutes of one-on-one time with mom or dad, that can be really powerful, unless your kid has separation anxiety and has a hard time actually removing from you after that one-on-one time, and that can actually make things tricky. The best way to incentivize a kid is to reward them. So give them some sort of like token or points or whatever if they can get into bed, or stickers, kind of whatever it is that your kid might find reinforcing. for getting into bed and staying in bed. You can implement consequences, so depending on the age of the kid, you could put a kid in timeout for refusal to go to bed. It feels really counterintuitive because you want them in the bed and now we're sticking them in a chair. But over time, kids learn being in my bed is more comfy than having to sit in a chair, and they'll actually learn that bed is the better option. If your kid's a little older, you can use things like privilege loss. So because you didn't stay in your bed, you've lost video games for tomorrow, that kind of a thing. Other questions? Yeah?
What are your recommendations on screen time?
The American Academy of Pediatrics has recommended that kids never have more than 2 hours of screen time per day. That's very tricky. Most of the teens I work with are using their screens like 14 hours a day, so we're way far off from what we typically want. But 2 hours a day is the goal. Kids under 2 actually should have no screen time whatsoever. So as a parent, it's our jobs to kind of restrict, which can be a lot of fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's called like strategic ignoring and other things come into play because unfortunately our kids become quite addicted. They've actually shown, some recent research has come out that the impact of video games neurobiologically in our brain is actually very consistent with like drugs. That it actually has very strong addictive properties, and there is new research coming out that's actually showing that it does negatively impact kids' attention spans and can actually start to mimic symptoms of ADHD with excessive use. So it is really important, but not a fun thing to have to restrict that time. Yeah, great question. Other questions?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very complicated subject, and maybe it's more an resiliency piece on all we covered here, but I mean, there is a much higher level of young female suicide, and I have a daughter, and is it not having a purpose, social media, is it very general and negative?
Yeah, no, it's a great, very timely conversation because, in the state of Colorado, it's the #1 reason that we lose kids, is above and beyond accidents, is intentional suicides in the teenage range. So it's a really important question. It's a complicated answer, of course, and there's lots of different things that go into it. They definitely have shown that social media is absolutely negatively impacting kids' mental health. So restricting access to social media at young ages, kids want access to Instagram and Snapchat when they're 8, and it's not good for them. They're not emotionally mature enough to manage kind of the things that come with social media, so we recommend restricted access until they're teenagers. And then it should be monitored access after that, so parents have access to the passwords, they're monitoring the stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, eating meals together as a family has actually been shown to be one of the most protective factors for kids and depression and suicidality. We are in a world where we are increasingly connected to each other. We're actually more isolated than ever. And so having face-to-face conversations with your kid, asking them how they're doing, having mealtime together is one of the most effective and important ways to help protect against that. It's not a sure-all safeguard, but it definitely helps a lot. And one of the things that parents worry about is actually talking to their kids about suicide, which we have shown actually the opposite is true. So there used to be a fear that if you asked, especially if at your kid's school there's just been a recent suicide, there's a worry that if we asked about it, we might be planting the idea in their head, that they might start thinking about it, but the opposite is actually true. Talking about it is actually one of the best ways to protect against it. The most important thing is that you look for risk factors, and if you start to see any of them, you give them mental health support as quick as you can. So some of the risk factors are things like social isolation, a change in performance at school, they stop doing the things they used to do that were fun, that kind of thing. I probably have time for one more question, and we'll wrap up. Yeah?
What's your thought on chores? In what age are you effective?
Yeah, great question. Yes, a big supporter of chores. I think they're a very important thing. They teach a lot of things, including work ethic and different things like that. Chores can actually be something you can teach kids and work with them to do very young. So I've seen kids as young as 2 or 3 have chores, but we don't really call them chores, but like they're expected to do certain things, like they have to clean up their toys after they're done playing with them. So definitely that's something that I would instill as kind of more part of like just the family culture, that this is all something we do, we all help out, we all pitch in around the house, and we all have expectations of things we have to do. And we get some sort of positive or negative consequences if we choose to do them or not. Some sort of incentives can be great, even if it's something as simple as if you do all your chores for the week, you get to pick what we have for dinner on Saturday. It doesn't have to necessarily be monetary, but having some sort of incentive can be important, because it teaches us what we're all going to be doing and what you're all doing today, which is that when you go to work, you get paid, and there's an A and B relationship. All right, guys, thanks so much for your participation. Really appreciate it.